I don't know what. Got this camera trained on this this stuff right here, so I guess you'll be seeing mostly my hands and hopefully hearing my voice. Alright, I want to talk about why I use the name Yeshua, the Messiah, instead of Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to know I don't just use Yeshua, the Messiah. Sometimes I use the name of Jesus. And if you see in these little things that I make up to hand out to people, sometimes I make some that have Yeshua and Jesus underneath. You notice I have Yeshua on top. To me, that signifies that Yeshua takes precedent. Jesus is underneath. This is my doing. This is my way of doing it. Now on the other ones, I use just Yeshua. Alright, the whole deal is, why am I talking about this? Why do I use the name Yeshua when I can try to use it all the time? But why do sometimes I use the name Jesus? Sometimes I'll say Yeshua Jesus. Okay, I'll go ahead and lay it out straight out to start with. Yeshua is the man's name. That's all there is to it. His name was Yeshua. It's a Hebrew word. It's not something that I picked up yesterday. I have studied for years, read everything I could lay my hands on about it for around 40 years, and you just can't get away from it. Now, I will admit that there are some variations of this name, Yeshua. Apparently, there is a formal version of it, something like Yehoshua or Yahushua, but it's the same name. In English, this name, Yeshua, would correspond to the name in the Old Testament of Joshua. So when you read in the Old Testament about the general Joshua that brought down the walls of Jericho, or was the general, his name was Yeshua, or Joshua. This name means literally salvation. So why did I finally decide that it was okay to use the name Yeshua? Well, after years of research, talking to anybody that would dare talk to me about it, researching the internet, researching back in the old days, researching encyclopedias, religious books, and so forth and so on, Yeshua comes up more than the most. Now let me tell you this, another thing that the internet has taught me lately. The name Yeshua still exists in Israel. Now that to me was a great revelation. There are people running around Israel to this very day with the name Yeshua. It's kind of like over here, there are certain names that you hear an awful lot of, you know. Dan, Danny, Steve, Bill. It's a popular name. I don't know how popular Yeshua is over there in Israel, but I'll tell you that it is a name, a legitimate name over there, and it does mean salvation. In the modern Hebrew language, this name means salvation. Now, whether or not this name was slightly different 2,000 years ago, I don't know. But the Israelites, the Jewish people over there, and the scholars who have been in business since the time of Yeshua have done their level best to not forget their language. They are great scholars. And if this name has come down in this form into modern times, you can just about be sure that it was very similar, if not exactly the same, at the time of Yeshua, Jesus. So why am I even having to talk about it? If you found out that that was his name, why wouldn't you say, oh, guess what? His name was Yeshua. It never was Jesus. Well, it is odd that I would have to talk about it. But I have found out that a certain number of people resist the name of Yeshua. I'm not talking about non-religious people. I'm talking about people that claim to be Christians, that claim to be followers of this man that we now know had the name Yeshua. And I found it odd that, and I have found it odd for many years, that these Christians or these believers would buck at the name of Yeshua. Some of them would outright say, well, I'll not use that name. I'll always call him Jesus. Don't find anything in the Bible corresponding to that. Don't find anything in the words of Yeshua where he said, you guys call me this Greek translation of my name, Jesus, which it is. By the way, it's not Jesus at all. The Greek transliteration is called Iesus. Iesus. Then it got turned into Isu in some other translations, and finally it became Jesus in English in the King James Bible. There was some talk about the Y and the J. You know, that's why there was apparently no Y in the Greek language. Now, I'm not a language scholar by any means, but I've looked at an awful lot of commentary on this. So to put it bluntly, the name Jesus was unheard of in biblical times. There was no such name, Jesus. This name right here, Yeshua, possibly Yahushua, became, through the process of translating from different languages, it became the name Jesus. Okay, so this is not my... If you care to find out, you'll find out that I'm right. Or I'm right to the extent that you almost can't challenge it anymore. Now, of course, there's always some room for error, you know, but as far as we can get to the bottom of it, that's what his name is. And I'll tell you another reason that I think that this was his name. There are people that are known as Messianic Jews. Those are Jewish people that have converted to belief in the Messiah that we know of as Jesus. Well, these Messianic Jews, they're people that speak Hebrew by and large. Guess what they call him? They call him Yeshua. Now, why don't they call him Jesus? Well, you'll hear them use the name Jesus sometimes, but they only do it for convenience. Because if you walk up to somebody and say Yeshua, you're trying to witness about the Messiah, sometimes people don't know what it is. And you have to explain to them. And that's what my mission here is, that I make these right here to tell people what his name was. And I make these with both names, I say, as jokingly, for people of little faith. So this is kind of like a halfway step. This is like a halfway house to get to what his real name is. You know the name Jesus. I'm telling you the name is Yeshua, and I'm giving you this right here to show you that these things are equal. Well, I don't even like that word. They're not equal, because how could something that's not your real name be equal to your real name? Now, you can probably tell I'm doing this off the cuff, but I can assure you that there have been many, many hours of research, thinking, prayer, arguments and counter-arguments in my own head. I first became aware, I'll tell you, I'm 67 years old. I first became aware of this when I was in my middle 20s. That was quite a few years ago. That was 40-something years ago. I did not immediately use that name Yeshua, but I used it some. But as time went by and I became more and more, whatever you say, spiritually enlightened, I hope. And then there came a time when I thought that I should basically ignore the fact that people around me, which is in South Georgia in the United States, didn't seem to dig this name right here, Yeshua. They wanted to keep on calling him Jesus. Now, let me tell you some of my reasons then. Okay, people know who I'm talking about. I'm not saying that this Jesus guy is not the same guy. I'm not saying that at all. That's him. He's known by this all over the world. Sometimes it's Jesus, Yehu, Jehu, different languages. But he's also known by this right here, and increasingly becoming known by this name. And it is through the efforts of people that are educating people about this name, Yeshua. I had a preacher visit me a couple of years ago, local, and I gave him one of these right here, telling him about the name of Yeshua, and he told me point blank, I'll never use that name. I'll never use the name Yeshua. He wouldn't even say, well, I don't know why he wouldn't use it. I don't get it. I'm going to tell you a story about a family that I knew. They had a son, and his name was the same name as his father. There were 6 children, and he was named after the father. I'll just say that the name's father was William. And little William, the little baby William II, and there was also a grandfather named William too, I'll tell you that. So there was 3 Williams there in a row, and they were all alive. And so the family, the parents and the grandparents and all decided that they would call the young William Willie for short. And their reasoning was, it will stop confusion. You know, when somebody said, hey, what's William doing? They didn't know who they were talking about. They said, well, let's just call him Willie. And they did. And this young man became Willie until he grew up and into a man, and he went into the army. And of course the army asked him, what is your name? And he said, my name is William II, or the William III, whatever it was. And they wrote it down that way, and he was referred to that from then on in the army as William. Private William, or whatever his rank was. So whenever this young man came back from being in the army, he announced to his family that he was no longer Willie, he was William. Well, his family bucked at it. Bucked, by bucked, I mean they didn't like that. Much like, I'm saying it's similar to this. Even though this, Jesus is not a nickname of Yeshua, but it's kind of the same thing. This, for the purposes of my analogy, it's not his name. And for some reason or another, Yeshua became known as Jesus through the years, even though it wasn't his name. So the family actually had a great split about William the third wanting to be called William rather than Willie. And some of the brothers and the sisters refused to do it. We're not calling you William. You're calling you Willie. So William got upset about it. And it started a rift in the family. Now, if William told his friends, my name is William, they called him William. If he told a stranger his name was William, he was called William. It was only the family that refused. Oh, there was great hard feelings, great hard feelings. There were arguments, and this young man began to distance himself from his siblings and his family because they refused to call him his name. And this thing was never resolved. After many years, though, some of the family began to begrudgingly refer to him as William, but then they would quickly say Willie. They just could not bring themselves to do that. I don't know what mechanism in human behavior would cause them to do that. I really don't know. But except if it was pride, maybe. Now, there was one member of the family that said to himself, hey, the guy wants to be called William, I'm going to call him William, even though it sounds quite strange to me, but I'm going to bite the bullet and do it. Consequently, that member of the family never had a falling out with William about his name, and they remained rather close. I can tell you another example similar to this. You know, when people come over here from foreign countries that have strange sounding names, one of those groups of people is Mexicans and other people from Latin America. And we, speaking English, the Spanish pronunciations do not easily trip off of our tongue. The Spanish pronunciation is strange to us, and since we haven't been brought up with it, we get more or less tongue-tied when we try to say those names. So many times when people come up here from Mexico and announce this Spanish name, it causes difficulty in the workplace, and because every time they tell somebody their Spanish name, the people they're talking to say, what? I can't say that, or what? And many, many times, everybody knows this happens, they will assign them an easy name that's either a Spanish name that we don't have trouble pronouncing, like Pepe. Pepe, we can say Pepe. But some of the other names, we can't say so easily. Usually if a guy's name is Carlos, they'll let him keep that name. But what if his name is Serapio? Well, a Serapio might even be an unusual name down there, I'm not sure. But a guy, I just happen to know a guy with the name Serapio. And Serapio, I met him one time, and I asked him, was doing some dealings with him, some little small business dealings, and I met him and I was buying something from him. And I said, by the way, what's your name? He was obviously from Mexico. He says, my name is Pepe. Might have said Bill, I'm not sure what he said, but it wasn't Serapio. It was some easy to say Anglican name. Well, I already knew I knew his name wasn't that, because it wasn't a Mexican name, whatever it was. Might have been Bill. I said, well, what is your real name? And he said, my name is Serapio. Frankly, I'd never heard the name before. I said, Serapio. That's not that hard to say. I can say that. So, after I got through dealing with him, and I was aware of this name situation and this name problem, I wrote the name down. As soon as I got away from there, I wrote the name down in my little notebook or whatever I had. And I said, well, by God, I'm not going to forget that man's name. If I ever see him again, I'm going to use his name. So I'd say 2 or 3 years rocked by. And I ran into this guy again. And I had remembered that name. And so I walked up to him and I said, he remembered me, and I said, hey, Serapio. And he looked at me with a stunned look. A smile came on his face, and he said, you remembered my name. What I did was show him respect. I showed him a sign of respect that he was not getting generally from people, the Americans, I'll call them Anglicans, Anglos. He very much respected or appreciated that. I could go on with this forever and ever. Now, you know another way. You know that one of the best ways to disrespect somebody, is to get their name wrong. Well, sometimes you'll see in movies, it's a well-known gag, I'll call it, where a higher ranking member of a business, say the boss, will, it happens all the time in the movies, they'll say somebody's name wrong. They'll just mispronounce it. And the person will say, well, my name is so-and-so, and then they'll mispronounce it again. But because they're higher than the other person, they're allowed to or can get away with disrespecting that person. And sometimes people's names are purposefully mispronounced to show disrespect. And then sometimes, they'll give you another example, just thought of, people will show disrespect for somebody by saying, what's her name? Or what's his name? Or whatchamacallit. Well, they know their name, but they don't want to say it. That's disrespectful. We all know that. Disrespectful. If you say you found a lady that you loved, or that you really was trying to court, or get to know better, there's no worse thing you could do than to not know their name or not pronounce it correctly. That shows disrespect. You don't care enough about that person to say their name. So after I tell you those stories, and let me tell you, I could talk on this all day. I'll be honest with you. I cannot understand why people will not respect the Creator of the universe, who was born, had enough love for us that He caused Himself to be born as a human being, to come down and interact with us, show us what God was like, and then cause Himself to be nailed to a cross and take upon Himself our penalty for the sins that we've committed. And the only thing He asked of us was that we believe Him. That we believe, which means that we see Him for who He was. We look upon that horrific crime scene and we say, oh my God, that is God there. God did this for us. Well, if this man did all this for us, if He loved us to that extent, then if we claim to love Him, I just am having trouble understanding why we can't get His name or do the very best job we can with His name. But I'm going to tell you one reason, and I know it because I had trouble with it myself. For years I knew His name, but in certain situations I would refrain from using His name, and I would use the name Jesus, because I knew that the people around me that I was talking to used the name Jesus. And I knew that if I used the name Yeshua, I felt intuitively that they would not like me as much, that they would not accept me as much. And of course everybody wants to appear to be a real smart person, and obviously we were talking about religious matters, and everybody wants to be the authority on that, be the big preacher. But then as time went by, I then had to force myself in a good way. I said, look, who do I love more? Do I love these people? Or do I love this Yeshua? Well, I love Yeshua more. But being human, the pride gets in the way. So I guess I'm saying that pride is one of the reasons that people do not use his name, even though they know what his name is. I talk to some people, they accept it, but they don't use it. A small minority of people out there hear it and they actually use it. It takes a while, sometimes to get used to it. So I guess pride is the reason. I guess is one of the reasons. People that are talking about religious matters and talking about the Messiah, they want to influence the people they're talking to. So I guess they're thinking that if they use the name Yeshua, the people won't accept what they're saying, teaching about the Messiah. So they go on with Jesus. And consequently, they probably have a larger following. I would submit to you that many of the professional preachers out there in our area, if they suddenly came into church on Sunday morning and announced that they were not using the name Jesus anymore, and that they were changing over to the name Yeshua, my guess is that, depending on who they work for, which is some kind of an organization, they would be severely reprimanded, possibly fired if they went on with it. They would lose members, and basically he would be looked upon as a nut. But it might be that he's preaching to people that aren't believers is why they won't accept the name. Now Yeshua said this. He said, if you declare my name before men, I will declare your name before the angels. And another time he said, before the Father. Well, what name was he talking about? Well, since the name Jesus wasn't even invented yet, I don't believe it was. Now, I might be wrong about that. It could have been in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation, Iesus, or Iesus, but it wasn't Jesus. The name Jesus, I'm quite sure, came along many hundreds of years later, possibly in the Middle Ages. But anyway, back to what I was saying. If Yeshua said, if you declare my name before men, what name was he talking about? Well, I know he was a prophet. But was he saying, declare my name that's going to become part of the Bible 500 years from now? Or was he saying, declare my name? Something to think about. Now back to the name of Jesus. I don't think it's a bad thing to say Jesus, because it is part of our culture and heritage. It is a part of the Bible. It has been translated that way. But we as educated people, we know that that's not his name now. And I'm not saying that you're bad if you say the name Jesus. But if you refuse to acknowledge the name Yeshua and refuse at least to use it sometimes as you're teaching people what his real name was, I'm suspicious about you. Because I see you dissing our Savior. I guarantee you walked up to a man on the street and used his wrong name, and he said, well, that's not my name. You would be embarrassed about it. In fact, I had a situation not long ago where a man was referring to me by a wrong name. Well, he didn't do it on purpose. He thought my name was, I'll say, Jerry. Kept calling me Jerry. Hey Jerry, how you doing? Well, I didn't correct him. Something my spirit just didn't. I didn't see him that much, but began to see him a little more every now and then. He'd say, "Hey Jerry, how's it going?" I said, "Fine, fine." And then this rocked on for a couple of months. And he called me Jerry in front of some other people. And one of those other people said, "Well, that's not his name. He's not Jerry." And this guy was mortified, humiliated that he had been calling me the wrong name. And he said, "Why didn't you tell me what your name was when I kept calling you that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It didn't bother me that you were calling me that. Wasn't any big deal to me." But he mentioned it a number of times after. "I'm so sorry that I called you that." And I said, "It's no big deal." There's another example. So that's why I used the name Yeshua. And Yeshua said, "Declare my name," and I'm declaring his name before men. All I know to do is do what he said, and that's what he said to do. And I will recommend Yeshua the Messiah as the person, the God-man that can give you eternal life if you will call on his name. And if you believe that he can do that, I can recommend to you that. Let me get to the bottom line though about that. I can't prove that that's all true. It's a belief system. I believe it. I read it, I studied it, and one day the light bulb went on in my head and I believed it. This story is true. This is no fairy tale. All right, so that's my story, and I believe it. This is Steve Coleman. Thanks for watching.